The theme of the first group is to communicate the truth to the Jews and Christians to the extent that they are left with no excuse to deny it, to institute a new ummah from among the Ishmaelites, its spiritual purification and isolation from the disbelievers, and a description of its final covenant with the Almighty. The theme of the second surah is to communicate the truth to the polytheists of Arabia to the extent that they are left with no excuse to deny it, spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers, and a description of the final worldly judgment of God. The third, fourth, fifth, and sixth groups have the same theme, which is delivering warning and glad tidings and spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers. The theme of the seventh group is to warn the leadership of the Quraysh of the consequences of the hereafter, to communicate the truth to them to the extent that they are left with no excuse to deny it, and as a result to warn them of a severe punishment, and to give glad tidings to Muhammad ﷺ of the dominance of his religion in the Arabian Peninsula. Briefly, this can be stated as delivering warnings and glad tidings. If the first group is not taken into consideration, the sequence of the groups is from the end to the beginning. Consequently, the seventh group ends on delivering warnings and glad tidings. After that, in the sixth, fifth, fourth, and third groups, besides the theme of delivering warning and glad tidings, the theme of spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers is also added. The second group is the culmination of the groups. It is here that the inzar of Muhammad ﷺ reaches its culmination too. Thus, besides the themes of delivering warning and glad tidings and the spiritual purification of the believers and their isolation from the disbelievers, the worldly judgment of God is also depicted, which is actually a miniature day of judgment that will take place before the actual day of judgment. The first group specifically addresses the people of the book instead of the polytheists of Arabia, and in this respect differs from the rest. However, it too relates to the worldly judgment pronounced in the second group in Surah Tawbah in the very manner the rest of the groups relate to it. Thus, the second group is the culmination of all the groups. The topic of inzar, after passing through various phases, reaches its peak of worldly judgment in this group from both sides. The only difference are the addressees. It is evident from this that from the seventh to the second group, an ascending order arrangement is present in order to relate it with the first group in this manner. The first group has been placed the foremost because the recipients of the Quran are its addressees the foremost. Except for the first group, the Meccan surahs of each group discuss delivering of warning and glad tidings and of communicating the truth to the addressees to the extent that they do not have any excuse to deny it, while the Medinan surahs discuss the spiritual purification and isolation of the believers. However, both the Meccan and Medinan surahs are in harmony and consonance with one another in each group and relate to one another in a manner a root and stem are related to the branches. This then is the arrangement of the Quran. If it is deliberated upon at length, the extent of guidance it provides to a student of the Quran in understanding the background of the surahs and their time of revelation and the addressees of the Quran, as well as in determining the topic of a surah and its purport, cannot be obtained whatsoever from anything external to the Quran. 10. Historical background. The Quran must be understood in the background in which it was revealed. According to established history, it was revealed to Muhammad ﷺ in the 7th century in Arabia. It is evident from this history that Muhammad ﷺ explained the Quran wherever and whenever a need arose, and so did the scholars among his companions and the scholars and researchers after them. The history of the Quran is an established fact and demands the following from its students. Firstly, he must be aware of the history of the period and place in which the Quran was revealed. Every student of the Quran knows that it mentions the destruction of previous Arab nations like the Ad, the Thamud, and the people of Madian. The views held by these peoples are alluded to by the Quran. It also mentions the preaching of the respective prophets and the way these people reacted to it. Also depicted in the Quran is the arrival of Abraham ﷺ into Arabia, the sacrifice of his son Ishmael ﷺ, and the construction of Baytullah. The Quran also refers to the influence of Abraham ﷺ and Ishmael ﷺ on the cultural, moral, social, and economic conditions of Arabia. Also portrayed in the Quran are the alterations done by the Quraysh in the religion constituted by Abraham ﷺ and Ishmael ﷺ, and the way they transformed the Baytullah, the center of monotheism, into a center of idol worship, and the religious innovations and rituals which, as a result of this, made way into their religion. Similarly discussed in the Quran are the circumstances in which the Quran was revealed, the incidents which took place at that time, as well as the political and religious views which were in vogue at that time. In order to understand all this, it is essential that the available history of that period be fully benefited from, while keeping it subservient to the words of the Quran and its coherence. Through this, many aspects which the Quran refers to can be understood better, and it is also helpful in unfolding many complexities of the Quran. Secondly, full importance should be given to whatever is mentioned in ahadith and athar literature with reference to the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. No doubt they contain many spurious things, and since the original words have not always been preserved, and a narrator has relied on his own intellect to transmit these words, a lot of changes have come about in the original words, yet this literature still contains many valuable gems. While pointing out the correct attitude in this regard, Imam Amin Ahsan Islahi writes, among the zanni or non-definite sources of tafsir, ahadith and athar occupy the highest status. If their authenticity could have been fully relied upon, they could have had the same importance in tafsir as the sunnah mutawatira. However, since ahadith and athar do not possess this degree of authenticity, they can only be benefited from as far as they are found to be in conformity with the absolute principles of interpreting the Quran delineated above. Those who give such importance to the hadith that they make the Quran subservient to it are neither aware of the status of the Quran nor that of the hadith. On the other hand, people who don't even refer to the hadith and athar in interpreting the Quran deprive themselves of a great treasure second only to the Quran. I consider the hadith to be totally derived from the Quran. Thus, I have not confined myself to ahadith which are mentioned in relation to a verse of the Quran. As far as I could, I have tried to benefit from the whole corpus of hadith. They have helped me the most in understanding the wisdom of the Quran. If I have found a hadith which is not in harmony with the Quran, I have deliberated upon it for a long period, and I have only rejected it when it became abundantly clear to me that it was against the Quran or it was in conflict with some principle of religion. As far as correct ahadith are concerned, seldom has there arisen a case in which they contradict the Quran. However, when this was the case, I have preferred the Quran to them and have written my reasons of this preference in detail. Amin Ahsan Islahi, Tadabbur-e-Quran, Volume 1, page 30. Thirdly, whatever scholars and exegetes have written must be given due consideration. It is only by benefiting from the words of previous scholars that new dimensions are added in such disciplines. This cannot be done by ignoring them. True knowledge does not come through arrogance and haughtiness. It comes with humility and a sincere love for the truth. Thus, it is essential that students of the Quran must always study the primary exegetical works on the Quran when they are forming an opinion or deliberating on and teaching a verse. Prior to the leading scholars of the Farai school who have worked on Quranic exegesis, three primary works on the exegesis of the Quran can be identified: Jami al-Bayan of Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, At-Tafsir al-Kabir of Ar-Razi, and Al-Kashaf of Az-Zamakhshari. The first of these is a compendium of the opinions of the authorities of the past. The second mostly deals with theological issues and the third with declensions and syntax. From among these primary works, though a student of the Quran should only take what is in harmony with the word of the Quran and its coherence and arrangement, however, he should never ignore these works.